Hello and welcome to our program Where God Weeps, a program in which we speak with church leaders from around the world about the situation of the suffering and persecuted church. Today we're going to talk about Uganda, a landlocked country just south of Sudan with about 45 million inhabitants. Christians are the largest religious community in the country at 85%. Catholics make up 39%. The church is still young and growing, though facing increasing pressure from Islamist extremists and the spread of sects. To tell us more, it's my great pleasure to welcome His Excellency Bishop Serverus Jjumba of the Masaka diocese in Uganda. Thank you, Your Excellency, for being with us here today in our program.
Thank you for welcoming me, Mark.
Your Excellency, a bit to yourself. You were born in Bolundo, and a rural area which is predominantly agricultural. Can you tell us a little bit about your family growing up, your background?
I was born in 1962, the 2nd of August, in a small village outside Masaka town called Bulando. And we grew up in an agricultural family. To say agriculture is to make it bigger, but a family that depends on subsistence agriculture, growing crops for food, and one cash crop, coffee.
Which is the very, very famous product of Uganda, of course.
Right, yeah. My parents were good practicing Christians. Actually, the father was a catechist. And when I grew up, my infant desire was to be an Air Force personnel.
A pilot?
A pilot,
yes.
But of the Air Force.
Yes.
And one time I went to Mass with my mother, and the priest sang very well the Latin text, Kyrie and Dominus Vobiscum, and then I got a spark in my heart that I should like to be like him. He was clad in a very smart black cassock. After Mass, I observed him keenly, and I shared with my mother. My father was a bit skeptic. He didn't think I was serious, so he queried me several times. After primary education, I went to the minor seminary, a boarding minor seminary. I did all the secondary education, high school in terms of USA, for 6 years. Then I crossed over to, just across the road is a philosophicum called Katigono Major Seminary, where I did the philosophy and also acquired an affiliated degree of Riedemann University, Bachelor of Philosophy.
You never had any doubts during this time. Once the spark had been settled in your heart, that was it. You were on that road. Did you ever think, maybe not?
It looks like I've never had a turn back.
Yes.
It was going straight.
Going straight.
Yeah. And then at home we have 1 year of pastoral spiritual experience. You go to a parish, kind of internship. And then after that, I went to Kampala, where we have the Theologicum, St. Mary's Major Seminary, Gaba. I did the 3 years, but I added 1 year extra because I broke my leg, and I spent 4 years. 1992, I was ordained a priest in the month of June.
Was your father there?
My father died in 1978.
Sorry.
So I had the bad experience of growing up with only the mother. Fortunately, she stood firm, and I'm happy she has just passed on last year at the age of 96.
Good age.
A good age. She lived at a mature age.
Your Excellency, you were called to become a bishop in July of 2019. What was your feeling when you first received the call from the nuncio?
Actually, I was called on the 16th of April, 2019, to the nunciature. By then, there was a chargé d'affaires, the secretary to the nuncio, and he talked around about the bush until he said, yeah, I have a proposal here from His Holiness the Pope. He wants you to be the next bishop. Because my predecessor had just turned 75 years, which is the mandatory age of retirement for a bishop.
Yes.
It was a shock. I asked for some time. I actually went to the chapel of the Annunciature. I prayed, then he told me, you can take some time and call back. I went home in a bit of doubts, but eventually I sent in my acceptance, and on 6th July of the same year, I was consecrated bishop, my very predecessor, who unfortunately passed on in 2021, January.
Your Excellency, your cathedral, the seat of your diocese of Masaka, is literally a stone throw away from where you were born, which I suppose has some ways advantages because you know of the environment, you know the challenges, but at the same time, is it not difficult to be a prophet in your own country?
Yes, as Jesus says, a prophet is not honored in his own home. My situation is that I have been in the compound of the cathedral since, I can say, 1975, because that's where I completed my primary education. In the year 2000, I was appointed as the diocesan financial administrator, and since 2000 to date, I'm in Kitovu. It's only 4.5 kilometers away from my home. I am happy that my predecessor was telling my people all the time, let your son serve the church, it's not for you only. And I think they responded very well. I practically know everybody around the cathedral. I have a lot of stories about the parish, and that gives me a grip and a relevance to the people whenever I go for pastoral mission to preach, especially masses at the cathedral. And the people are happy if you can spot him and say, oh, you are a son of so-and-so, you are a grandchild of the other, your father was my classmate.
There's a joy.
Those stories make the people more attached to me,
yes,
rather than repelling them.
Your Excellency, the church in Uganda is very young. It was the first missionaries 1879, I believe. What are the challenges of such a young church? The church is growing, but what are the challenges that come with such a youthful church?
Yeah, as you mentioned, the Catholic faith arrived in Uganda in 1879, and there were religious wars at the beginning, and then the Catholics were pushed in one corner of the country, that is Masaka, and it's actually called Voodoo. In our local language means a place where you migrate to. The Catholics migrated to that area, and they had no priests for some time around them, but they later strengthened themselves, and the faith grew so much so that actually Masaka, you can say, is the cradle of Catholicism in Uganda. The challenges we have is a mix. Some people still have a tendency, they are drawn back to animism. In some places they call it syncretism.
Exactly.
This is both positive and negative, because a person who has faith in the spiritual world can easily be evangelized to believe in the invisible God. But also it has another element. They want something visible to cling on, and this has been the struggle right from the beginning. The missionaries struggled against it. We have done a lot. Their successors, they have done a lot.
How do you describe the syncretism? How would it be practically? How do we understand syncretism?
Yeah. To understand it practically, it means that I am baptized, but when I get challenges in life, I think there is a traditional solution to my problem.
Like a sacrifice, or
like falling sick. Somebody may think he needs to make an animal sacrifice or a bird. But there are others who are really solid and they have all their problems before God. And actually, when I chose the theme of my episcopate, it is we preach Christ crucified. I wanted the people to understand that, and including myself, that in life we may have challenges, but they cannot be beyond the salvation of the cross. And those challenges, if we bring them to Christ, are salvific, not for me alone, but maybe and certainly for the community. When I chose this theme, that was at the back of my mind, so that the people get attached to the sacrament, especially the sacrament of the Eucharist, the real presence of Jesus Christ, but whom we meet at the cross, at Calvary.
Your Excellency, your integration of traditional cultural values,
Right.
of the African values, if I understand correctly, you would like to integrate them so that they don't get lost.
Yeah.
Do you fear that African culture is being lost with the arrival of ideas coming from other parts of the world?
It's not a fear as such, but a concern that our African values, some of them, can be integrated in the Catholic faith and, so to say, be baptized. And also they help us to understand the faith a little better. It's a foundation, a building stone on which we can explain the Catholic faith. Many of them, we can do it.
But then, of course, you have run the risk of the question of syncretism. It's a fine line.
Yeah.
It's a fine line.
It is a very thin line, but again, the risk has to be faced, I think, because instead of alienating this individual, I want to build on what she has to bring up the Christian mentality.
One topic which I know that you recently were, the question of the back cloth.
Yeah.
For the priests.
Yes.
Can you explain that one, for example?
The back cloth is the caricio dress. The tree on which it grows is very good for the preservation of the environment. It's very good for intercropping, like the staple food crop banana can grow very well under that tree, a fig tree, we call it mutuba in our language. The same tree can grow very well and protect the cash crop, which is coffee. And when we use it, like, as I said, in our traditional functions, we kind of appeal to the people that some of these don't think they are satanic, they are good. Like I've mentioned this one, it's a natural, organic cloth. And to keep the trees is also positive, the environmental protection. And when we use it for funeral, like that's where I was arguing that we need not only to bury somebody in the synthetic clothes, it absorbs moisture.
Ah, yes.
And many people who have been buried many years ago are found inside those bark cloth.
It's the bark of the tree?
It's the bark of the tree.
It's the bark of the tree.
They remove it, and then it's actually a big business. I look at it from the economic perspective, environmental perspective.
And also the traditional, that it is something traditional to your culture that you can keep.
You can keep.
You mentioned the word witchcraft.
Yeah.
How much is this still prevalent in the Ugandan culture, and how is the church trying to work in this question?
Witchcraft should be understood like superstition, that somebody looks at a stone that overwhelms him, its shape, let's say, and then thinks there is special power in that stone. And he or she wants to keep it as a kind of security for themselves. So it has to be understood in that line and explained to the people that we don't need to hang on anything else. If we have faith in the living God, saved by the Son of God, Jesus Christ, inspired by the Holy Spirit, all of these others are creatures, and we should not depend on them for our security.
Your Excellency, I want to come back to the question that you referred to earlier about the suffering of the early Christians, the early Catholics in Uganda, and in particular, the the martyrs, the Ugandan martyrs, 22 persons who were killed for their faith. How much and how important are the Ugandan martyrs still to the church and the faith in Uganda today?
The Ugandan martyrs are an inspiration, that in spite of suffering, somebody can remain faithful to the faith. And they are a special inspiration because they were not priests, they were not religious, they were lay people. Some of them barely 2 years baptized. Actually, some of them got the baptism of blood. They were killed before baptism. That suffering strengthened our faith, but it has also soiled our nation. And we were fortunate that St. Paul VI, Pope, canonized them soon after the Second Vatican Council, and all the fathers were still around here, and that made them very widely known. And this was not the only time of the suffering of the church in Uganda. In the 70s, we had another very tough
under Idi Amin.
Under Idi Amin. Actually, when I grew up, most of the prominent Catholics in Masaka diocese were killed, or most of them were run into exile. Catholics, not everybody. And we remember a very tragic incident in 1977, 1976, when a priest was removed from the altar. And for us who were kids in the compound knew him. 7:20 in the morning, he was celebrating Mass. He was taken by the soldiers, and we have never had him again. He disappeared. These moments have been tough, but they have also strengthened the people. There are challenges, we endure them, we go through them. And when we celebrated the 50 years of the martyrs' canonization, we were lucky. Pope Francis came a year after, and he told us that we should not take them as relics of the museum, but they should be living inspiration to us. And you see this, every 3rd of June, Namugongo is booming. You have around 800 people, 800,000 people.
800,000 people come.
To 1 million, yeah.
My goodness.
And you really see the real spirit of prayer, with a lot of other things going around, but we are lucky we have them. And we also believe in their intercession, and yeah.
On this occasion of the Ugandan martyrs, what we've just been speaking about, the bishops at that time spoke out very strongly, condemning, and I quote, murders, land conflicts, corruption, and torture. What is it in Uganda's society today that spoke so strongly that the bishops felt they had to speak out about this at such an occasion?
Yeah, we have had a very tumultuous history of political turmoil, and since Idi Amin, as I said, these things keep coming back. We had a guerrilla war from 1980 to 1986. That was 5 years. Many people died.
You had also the LRA, Joseph
the
Kony.
LRA, that was the aftermath of the guerrilla war. One political leader is called Paul Samoge, said, when you start guerrilla wars, it becomes a spiral. It doesn't end. So that has been disturbing us for so long. And when the governments in power are challenged again, they become, I think, nervous, and many people use that confusion, others to kill, others to torture, like you mentioned, others to grab other people's property. And that's why the bishops come out to address it very strongly. This element of injustice is still continuing, but we endeavor to make sure that we have a system in the courts which can help the the weak people. But we are not yet there yet.
Not out of the woods yet.
We are not yet out of the woods.
There's another challenge, particularly in the east of Uganda, and that is the relatively new phenomenon for Uganda of Islamist extremism.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little picture what's happening and how is this starting to affect the country?
Islamic extremism spills over from Somalia to Kenya and to northeastern Uganda. And I can say there have been 1, 2, 3 instances in the country, unfortunate ones. They plant bombs and they kill people. But on the whole, it has been controlled, thanks to the security agencies. They manage it, they have tried to manage it. Yeah.
Has this affected the dialogue that is between yourselves and your counterparts, the Muslim imams, and has this been affected, or have you been able to keep a unity in your dialogue, in your relations with the Muslims?
In Uganda, the religious conflicts were there in the beginning, and Idi Amin tried to fuel them again, but they don't really affect much the society. Catholics, Protestants, and Muslims, we work very closely together. We have some concern that we see an extreme element coming in. You can tell them by their way of dress and their way of associating. Like in some cultural functions, they don't participate, they don't go for weddings, they don't go for last funeral rites. Those are elements that are causing concern. But on the whole, it has not yet blown out.
A little bit to the positive note, and that is that the Catholic Church is growing in Uganda, the faith is growing, and also vocations are growing. How do you, and to what do you attribute this resurgence of the faith, this new blossoming of the faith also through priestly vocations?
The church is growing in numbers, the quality. Well, I always say after the cardinal in Uganda that quality is built on quantity, so the quantity is positive in itself. You work on the quantity to build the quality. That's very positive. We have blooming vocations to the religious life, to the priestly life, and the marriage life. And for me, I always attribute this growth of the other vocations, the religious and the clergy, onto the strength of the family life. In the diocese of Masaka, my predecessors, the first one, Bishop Chiwanuka, Bishop Dungu, and the latest Bishop Kagwa, they worked very hard on strengthening the Christian family. And that's where we get the vocations. We have big families, 6 children, 8, and you can easily get vocations from there. And many of these Christians, they try to practice. And then the children also have another element of many Catholic-founded schools, primary and secondary. So when the kids go through those schools, they still remain in the faith streamline. Those are very positive elements, but also they give us a challenge. It means the priests have to work very hard. And in Masaka, you don't work from the center, you go to the villages. If there's a funeral, you go to the family. If there is a sick person, you go to the home. Very few come to the hospitals. And also those schools, like in Masaka, we have 459 primary schools, Catholic founded. So the young priests have to run around those schools to teach catechism, to give sacraments, to say mass, and so.
It's still a missionary church in this way.
Yeah.
Your Excellency, how can we help? You've presented a number of challenges, a number of joys. How can we help?
I am grateful to Church in Need that, like for me, the clergy in my diocese, they don't have a monthly salary. But when I get mass stipend, they depend on that little that comes out of the mass, they say. And we don't have enough money to construct churches. Church indeed comes out very strongly to assist us, to roof a structure which we have started and we have failed on the way. Transport is another very important area. As I mentioned, the religious and the priests go out. I forgot to mention the element of the catechists. We have 769 catechists all over the diocese. They live with the communities. They also strengthen the people to keep the faith. All those need some kind of sustenance, some kind of facilitation, and the church need to do us a lot of service as they are doing, but we plead for more to facilitate us. Our roads are very bad. The road network is poor. A motorbike, if it's a car, it should be a strong car. But we are trying and we are grateful. Even the vocations. Last year I had 149 major seminarians, both philosophy and theology. That needs like 80 million Uganda shillings, around 20,000 to sustain them.
That's correct.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
But that's in addition to what the families have to contribute and what we find in the seminaries here. It's a lot of money by our standards. Yeah.
Your Excellency.
We need that assistance as well. We pray that we remain a strong church and a universal church.
It's a beautiful church in Uganda.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for having been with us today in our program, Where God Weeps. And if you'd like to know more about the situation of the church in Uganda, or perhaps how you might be able to help, I would encourage you to look at the contact information at the end of this program. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.